Hi everyone and welcome to the Keyboard Chronicles, a podcast for keyboard players of the gigging variety. I'm your host David Holloway and I have Mr. Paul Bindig here with me. How are you, sir?
I'm going great. Thank you, David.
So we're back for part two of this insane, or maybe Aladdin insane interview with, that's a dad joke, interview with Mike Garson. So as we said at the start of last episode, we were on a bit of a high after recording this one, and rightly so. In this second part, we do talk a little bit more Bowie, but the vast majority is dedicated to the other wonderful projects Mike has been dedicated to, everything from jazz, other pop and rock acts, his teaching, his music therapy work. We ask all our standard Desert Island Discs questions, the quick 5-10, and he has unique perspectives on them. And at the very end, and this is not a way to get you to listen to the end, but he does something pretty amazing right at the end for us all, and highly recommend you do hang around for that last 10 minutes. That'd be a fair statement, Paul?
Yeah, it's a real special treat, and David is not lying when he says this is not a gimmick. Like, I know all those podcasts and all those YouTubes, they say, yeah, hang around to the end because that helps the algorithm. Don't worry about the algorithm, just listen to the end because it's good. That's what I'll say to you.
No, absolutely. So we hope you enjoy part two, and we'll talk to you again after the show. And you've continued, Mike, to create soundtracks for people's lives after David Bowie, and that's an understatement to say the least. So let's move into that area. You've worked with some really notable musicians over the years since, such as Nine Inch Nails and Smashing Pumpkins, and we'll cover them off separately. But how did progressing with other artists differ from your previous rock and pop experiences you'd had with David?
There's no one who is David. I have not worked. The closest one is still many, many eons or yards away from them. And trust me, they've been great ones. And he was on another level. A friend of mine pointed out he had this dream right after David passed. And he said, it seemed in this dream like we have two limbs. It seems like he has three. But he meant it like spiritually. He had an extra gift. And I think in 500 years, assuming this planet doesn't do itself in with the crazies out there, that's another subject for another time, and it won't be me discussing it, but you can get the vibe. So, in 500 years, we will know him. We will know the Beatles. We will know Dylan. I'm running out already. We'll know, obviously, John Lennon, and maybe the Rolling Stones, maybe. But David, his body of work, what about his acting? What about his painting? Do you see this picture right here?
Oh, yeah.
He did that of me while we were recording in Switzerland, in Montreux, at that studio Queen recorded at. He had an easel out and was doing.
That's amazing.
That's actually a charcoal. So he was supposed to give me 3 of them, but I think he sold 2 of them in London. Some of my stupid faces on somebody's wall in London. I wanted all 3 of them, but maybe he needed money. I don't know. So anyway, he did send me that, and I'm very happy that I did not lose that because we lost our home a few years ago in the LA fires. And the only thing I took was some floppy disks of my music and that picture. Everything else was destroyed.
Wow. It's great you're able to at least salvage that. It's sort of, listening to you talk about him that way, Mike, it almost makes me think of him as like a latter-day Da Vinci or something like that, that real amazing artistic skill set across so many different media.
Exactly. And he was that. And I kind of recognized that early on because when I joined the Spiders from Mars on that first American Ziggy Stardust tour in 1972, I only played about 12 songs out of 22 songs. So I would sneak out into the audience, and the shows weren't even sold out because he'd never been in America. I'd sit in the first row when I wasn't playing and watch him. And I thought, oh, this is someone to be reckoned with.
And and Mike, I'm not asking this in a paparazzi or tabloid sort of way, but what impact did David's passing have on your playing in that interim term? Did it actually impact your desire to play, or how can I go ahead into the future and work with people that perhaps aren't at the same level? What was your mental outlook at the time?
Well, of course, I was very sad, and I had just had some emails with him a few weeks before he passed, and he was talking about some of the tours, and I was getting very excited, and it wasn't to be. I feel that I owe him my career because I was a very good pianist before I joined him, and I was working, and I'd still be working if I wasn't with him. But I would be just an excellent keyboard player. Maybe did studio work. I'm also a composer, film writer. We'll get into all that later. But I'd just be very, very competent, whatever level that was. But all of a sudden, going from a few hundred classical fans to a few thousand jazz fans to millions of people who know my playing because of him. And all the artists that I've worked with were because of him. Smashing Pumpkins, I met them on a tour playing in Paris together, and David introduced me to Billy Corgan. And then Nine Inch Nails, David Bowie said to me, this is a guy to be reckoned with. You should work with him. And then he called me to do his Fragile album. We've done a lot of things since then. So David was the one who was responsible for all that. So I really owe him a lot. And still feel very connected to him spiritually, and I could feel him sometimes. And I think in certain ways my career has taken a big jump since his passing, which is kind of horrible from one viewpoint, losing him, but in terms of a personal thing, it's just that the further it gets away from his death, the more, the people who knew him in a deep way, people are interested, and no less if you played with him. Well, show me if you could do a concert for me. Do this. Can you do his music? Can you do it with this singer? Can you do that? And I do have a residency in LA at this place called the Sunrose, and I play there every month or twice a month with all great singers. Just did something with Luke Spiller from the Struts and different people. And we always do about 6 Bowie songs, and then we do some standards and some original of whoever the artist is. Sometimes just piano and voice. Sometimes I have a band. Beck sat in a few weeks ago, and on and on. So I'm carrying it forward the best I can. You got to understand, I'm just one little sliver in this guy's universe. It was a big one because of the Aladdin Sane album. But then look what Carlos contributed Alomar with Fame, And then look what, it's on and on. There's Earl Slick's contribution on Station to Station, and then you have the great drummers that when we worked with Andy Newmark, he had already played with Sly and the Family Stone. So there was no one, every musician he had was the perfect musician at that time. So I guess we weren't fully done with David, huh?
Well, no, it's an incredible legacy, and I think the world will, as you said, in 500 years' time, I think this is music people will still be talking about. So we'll never be fully done with David. I think is a good way to look at it. Mike, you mentioned introductions through your experience working with David, introductions and openings with other artists, and I'd just like to touch on the Smashing Pumpkins, who you mentioned. Now, my perception of the Smashing Pumpkins is they were certainly not a keyboard band, but they certainly are now. And I'm really interested in your impact that you've had on them and working with Billy.
Well, let me start off with Jimmy Chamberlain, right? He's a great drummer, and he's fun to play with. And I also played on his solo album. I think it came out in Japan. You could probably hear a few tracks, but it's really good. So when I joined, Darcy was playing bass. She was the original bassist. Then it was Melissa afterwards, who had worked with... she was in Hull, right.
Courtney Love.
And Courtney, yeah. So before I did a full tour with the Pumpkins, I did a separate tour with Kenny Aronoff on drums, fantastic studio drummer and perfect time. It was called the Adore Tour, Adore, because Billy had just done that album, and he decided to take it on tour, and Darcy was on it, but it was Kenny. But he had two other percussionists. He had a guy with timpanis and someone else with gongs. So there were three percussionists, and James was playing guitar, and then there was some other musicians, and we did a 3-month tour. We must have hundreds of hours of recorded stuff. He told me at the time, I won't release it for 20 years. Well, it's about 20 years. I hope he puts it out one day. So I did that, and he also was very open to me inserting my idea. He would, in the middle of a show, stop the band and tell me to play Gershwin's Summertime. It's like, what is this, request or something? I'm at the fucking Holiday Inn. What's going on here? And I'd play Summertime, So that was a great experience. And then, all these rock bands, they always are retiring themselves, and then 3 years later they're back again, or 2 years later, and then this is my farewell show, and then 2 years later they're back again. Well, I did supposedly their last 4-hour show in their first club that they worked with in Chicago. They opened there, and they supposedly were closing we did a 4-hour show, and he brought up all his inspirations, and they were fantastic to work with. There wasn't as much space for my piano playing or synth playing in that group as there was for David, because David and I from another generation, so we were affected by Broadway, Anthony Newley. We both had a deep love for jazz, and but I'm sitting there in the dressing room in Paris, and then David has his bodyguard come out and says, "You got to meet Billy Corgan. We're having a discussion about God. We want to know what you think." That's just, instead of how's the weather, that was my introduction to Billy. So, and then, we're good friends. We did a movie called Stigmata together. We did the sound, all the music, and it was really good. And I just played with him at the Hollywood Bowl a few months ago. They played here opposite Perry Farrell and Jane's Addiction, and he had me come up for one song.
That's great. And they're currently touring, I think, Mike. I think they're in Australia, about to hit Australia with a wrestling show in tow. I was about to say, and I need to ask a funny question. When you were touring with Kenny Aronoff on drums, did the two of you get mixed up? I know there's not a huge resemblance, but there's some resemblance there.
Yes. There was... I was bald, Kenny was bald, and Billy was bald.
That's right, he was too.
And so I was walking with him in some crazy Coliseum in Italy somewhere, and we were on the floor, and there were people way up in the stadium screaming out to me, "Billy, Billy, Billy," but it was me, and so between the three of us, it was kind of hilarious, because at that time he had shaved his head. There was earlier times he didn't, So, so it was humorous. Now, Kenny was a very precise drummer. Jimmy is very loosey-goosey, and so is Billy. And they tend to rush together in a cool way. But Kenny was to the click on everything. So there were some conflicts with him and Billy on that tour. But the music was still great. There are some great YouTubes of the band,
Yeah, it's an amazing band. And Kenny Aronoff's an incredible drummer. Just about all my drummer friends, he's their hero, just because of exactly what you said, Mike, his precision and his power and that sort of thing. So,
I met him. I worked with him on an album for Seal years back, and I think we met then. And just a great drummer. He's a good friend and fun to tour with.
Yeah, cool. It's nice to hear that these people are good to get along with as well. For those of us who look at them from afar. I'm interested in Trent Reznor. So you mentioned that Bowie said that he's a guy you should take seriously. And look, from an outsider looking in, he's always struck me as something of a musical genius, to be honest. I'd love to know about your relationship. You've worked with him successfully over a long period of years. Talk us about working with Trent Reznor.
In terms of genius level, he'd be the closest one to Bowie. In a different way, obviously. No one could perform like Bowie, and no one had that charisma like Bowie on stage. But Trent, don't forget, we toured with them, so they would start the show, then we'd come on and play with them, and David would sing a Trent Reznor song, and Trent would sing a Bowie song, and would dovetail in the middle of the shows. He was brilliant. And when David said to me, David is kind of like a prophet in that he said, watch this guy. And he's the one. He didn't say any other band. He said him. And he said, you should record with him. And that's exactly what I did. But the guy has won 2 Oscars in a whole other field, separate from Nine Inch Nails, as a film composer. I did Watchmen. I don't know if you got that in Australia. It was an 8-series sci-fi thing. And the whole first 6 minutes is me playing piano, which he called me to do for that. It's worth checking out because it's wild. He would call me anytime it was a hard piano part he wanted done. But he's very competent at the piano, and he plays sax, he plays cello. He's just brilliant and a very hard worker and a nice guy and has a beautiful family, and we're still in touch. And he called me a few months ago to play on a track he was producing for Halsey. She's a singer. I played on a track, so strange things with him. I did some background music for the movie Gone Girl that he did the score for. So he just would call me for unusual things, and then I called him to do some stuff with me with my alumni setup for the streams that I did.
That's amazing, and obviously he's also got a hugely positive collaboration with Atticus Ross, who is on my bucket list of people I would kill to talk to. Have you dealt with Atticus much as well in your relationship with Trent?
Well, yes, I did, and the irony is I would have liked to do what you just said and pick his brain, right? All he wanted to know was Bowie stories and talk to me about my piano playing. So it wasn't what I wanted, but that's what he wanted, and I was respectful and answered his question and never got around to talking about it. You just hear it from, their collaboration. It's pretty powerful.
It is. And speaking of powerful collaborations, you've been in one since 1984, and that's your ensemble with Jim, Free Flight. Tell us about that and what a stalwart, amazing collaboration that's been through over the decades.
Funnily enough, 3 weeks ago, we had a reunion. We hadn't played for 20 years.
Wow.
And we played in town just 3 weeks ago. It was fantastic. Free Flight, mixed jazz and classical. And in the years that I wasn't with Bowie, I was playing with Free Flight. The drummer initially was Ralph Humphrey, who played with Frank Zappa, Al Jarreau, top session player in LA, could read anything, wrote a drum book called Even in the Odds, one of the most crazy drum books to practice from for a drummer. But I practiced from it as a pianist out of it because piano is a percussion instrument. And he managed in 4/4 tempo to put every exercise was in 4/4, but they all had groups of 5, 7, 9s, 11s, or 13 over it, and he had figured it all out how to make exercises out of that. So they were great, and I love Ralph. And we had a nice bass player named Jim Lacefield. He unfortunately passed, and then another bass player named Dave Carpenter, who was a great jazz player. He also passed. So I had a new bass player for the show 3 weeks ago, Edwin Livingston, a very good bass player. He used to play with Natalie Cole when she was around, and a young drummer named Dan Schnell. So I put new rhythm section together, but the flutist who formed Free Flight was Jim Walker. He had played in the LA Phil for 7 years as principal flutist, and he played in Pittsburgh Symphony under Andre Previn. And he actually had the balls to retire from a symphony orchestra when you spend your whole life to get in an orchestra, and worked under Giulini and Zubin Mehta and Bernstein, and these great conductors, to form Free Flight. And we would travel around the country and play small places, 1,000, 2,000. But people loved us. We were on the Hollywood Bowl. We were at Lincoln Center. There used to be a famous TV show in the 70s and 80s called Johnny Carson over here. And we did that. He had us on 2 nights in a row.
Wow.
And we had done that show 3 times. It was just a great band, like 4 virtuosos. My head isn't in that space now because it's so many notes, and I like things a little simpler these days. But it was fun to relearn that music and play a few weeks ago. So it was a great band, and it was a fusion band essentially of classical and jazz, instrumental.
Yeah, no, amazing stuff, and we'll be linking to a lot of Free Flight's work in our show notes. And then, Mike, we mentioned at the start of the show, you've done some really interesting work in music therapy. So just give us a little bit of insight into how you developed that relationship in relation to music therapy and what you've done.
When I grew up, you think of music as entertaining, and you think of acts that I used to see in Las Vegas: Sammy Davis Jr., Frank Sinatra, Elvis Presley. I saw these acts, Liberace. And you think of music as some form of entertainment, and which of course it is. But the music that I loved seemed to go directly into the soul and really had a spiritual intent connected with it. And you could hear that in any great artist in classical, jazz, rock, whatever. So at a certain point, as I got a little older, I realized I'm not discovering the wheel. The wheel is there, but music is a healing agent. And then, as of recent, meaning last 5-10 years, I realized it might be the only sane thing on the planet, especially today. You know what I mean? And you don't have political problems with it. Someone likes this group, someone like that, that's fine. But everybody has their headphones on, or the iPods, or whatever it is that they're walking around with anywhere in the world and listening to what they like. And I think there would be no world if there was no music. And I think music is healing. So when that was happening, I started to write a lot of music that I felt was healing. The truth of the matter is, as I got more experience, I realized whatever a person loves is what's healing for them. But the approach I took, as I was working with sick patients with dementia, and Alzheimer, and MS, and Parkinson, and they were older, we played them 30 of my pieces, and they chose 12. That became my symphonic healing suite. I've never even released it. I get so much music in my head that I do it, and then I'm doing the next project, and I still have those recordings. I didn't even do anything with it. But some of the patients said, this is not a healing suite. This piece is giving me anxiety. So I would take that out of the suite and let them choose their favorite 12 pieces. We had a Parkinson patient who could barely walk, and she danced on stage with her husband. The audience, there wasn't a dry eye in the place. So I had a symphony orchestra, I had a children's choir, I had a jazz group, and I had several singers. I had an opera singer, I had a pop singer. So it was a great day. Unfortunately, it was pouring raining that day, so people couldn't even get out. It was storming. LA doesn't usually get that. But we still had, 800-900 people there. It probably could have held 1,500. But it was a fantastic show. And I'm still not done with it. I probably have written 200 pieces that have that intent on healing. But in this particular 40 minutes or an hour were these pieces. But when I worked with the brain surgeon, he agreed with me that some of his patients, when they listen to music, they relax, they calm down, and he could use it as a prescription, so to speak. So, I think everyone knew that. I mean, Bach and all those people wrote for the church, and this and that, and look at Elton John doing Candle in the Wind when Diana passed. I mean, Bowie at 9/11 and Paul Simon and Bette Midler when all that happened over here. There's something very powerful, especially if that's part of your spiritual intention and you want that desired end result.
Yeah, I mean the deep impact music has on people is just so well illustrated in that story, and thanks for sharing a bit of that with us, Mike. Similarly, you can't imagine a film or a TV show without a soundtrack. Same thing, the music carries along the story so much, and you've done extensive work, and you alluded to some of it before with film and TV series. And again, interested in your approach there. How does it maybe differ from recording with a band, and what sort of work can we look forward to from you in the future in that regard?
I don't know what the future's going to bring. I know a year after Liberace, the great pianist, passed away in the late 80s, I was the pianist that was called to do all the piano work for the ABC series in America, and they auditioned like 20 people. They went to Vegas and they had all these look-alike Liberace guys, but they couldn't play well. And then they came to LA and they wanted me in his rings, his real rings, and his outfits. But I was 18 pounds overweight to fit into it. And they said, you can't have the gig, you're the perfect pianist. I said, what if I lose 18 pounds in 10 days? If you can do that, you got the gig. So I went on a fast and I lost 18 pounds. I went in there, they put all these rings on me and his wig, and they tell me the rings are custom jewelry, fake. So I go into Hollywood 1 a.m. and I'm showing everybody the rings. 2 a.m, the phone rings. They were the real rings, but because they didn't know me, they didn't tell me. They were like worth $2 million.
That's amazing.
So, I mean, I've had great experiences in the music business. I mean, I substituted in 1972 for Chick Corea for 2 nights for Mel Lewis, Thad Jones' big band, which was a very famous group in that world, And, Freddie Hubbard out of nowhere was one of the greatest trumpet players. And a gig once with Stan Getz. And like I said, Coltrane's drummer Elvin, the piano player, fell off the bandstand drunk. And they dragged him onto the street. This is in Greenwich Village. And Elvin said, is there a piano player in the house? And I raised my hand. And I worked with him a few nights. And it was just changed my life. We all have those moments,
Mike, it must give you a lot of satisfaction to be the guy that gets called upon when we need a really great piano player. Like you mentioned it before, Trent Reznor gives you the call, and this is a really hard piano part. I'd better get Mike to do this. It must give you a really nice sense of satisfaction that's acknowledged and respected and recognised.
Well, with people's attention span these days is about 8 seconds, right? So I would sit at the piano. I probably played the piano over 150,000 hours. So I have that discipline. I could sit and do the same drill for 6 hours and just keep playing it and have a ball because it's a meditation to me, It's flattering, but I take it seriously. I got a call about 20 years ago in the evening to be at a recording session. Nobody could read this piano part for some movie. I could barely read it, but I got through it. And I did my homework when the score arrived, and then I went in and played it. So I've had those, but I don't even think of reading music even these days because everything I do is pretty much improvised.
And on that, Mike, with your film and sound work, and I'm taking a devil's advocate position here, obviously film and sound work can be highly rigid. You've got this amount of time to fill in, you've got to do certain things at certain times. But I would argue your innate ability to improvise and essentially pass a feeling from your brain to your fingers is actually brilliant for film and sound work. It would actually make it, in quotation marks, easier for you than someone that doesn't have that ability.
I saw that gift, and my wife always thought I'd be a very famous film composer in Hollywood. But my life went in a different way. I love performing more than anything. But there have been people in rough situations Even when Stigmata, one of the main themes, they put it up, and I just went to the piano. I don't remember what I played, but something of that nature as the film was going, and that was the track. So I could literally, like the old days of silent movies, I could watch the film and be done in 2 hours. So I'm waiting for that score to come to me. And because I don't like a lot of the Hollywood bullshit and the politics, and like I said, being micromanaged. But if someone recognizes what you just said, I'm there because I love film and I love supporting it.
Yeah, and as you said, Mike, your career ultimately, the main thing did was a lot of live shows, collaborating with a lot of rock artists, and Bowie for 30 years. And look, over 600 live dates with Bowie alone, a vast amount of experience. With that in mind, I'd love to know, across any artist that you've worked with, what's the most challenging tour you've been involved with, whether it's from a musical perspective or a logistics perspective or maybe a personal perspective?
Well, in the early days, I was in a band called Brethren in 1970. Rick Murata, the drummer who played with Roberta Flack and many people, he was the drummer. He also wrote the theme for the TV series Raymond. So he's a very talented drummer and a good composer. And he was in the band. There was a guitarist and bass player. And we had management by Sid Bernstein, who was the guy who brought the Beatles to Shea Stadium. And he thought we'd be the next Beatles. I knew we wouldn't because the lead singer sounded like Stevie Winwood, so I knew it wasn't original enough. But we had a nice little run. We used to open up for Santana and Joe Cocker and Leon Russell, and it was a great band. But you're traveling in a van and no money and city to city, and the guitar player be irresponsible and show up late. I remember we played we opened for Jethro Tull, and our guitarist and lead singer not there. I had to do the whole show, piano and bass and drums, and it was a rock show. And so it was difficult that way, both financially and the touring. Also, when I was touring with the alumni band all through Europe and America, we're getting small sums of money compared to what David Bowie would get, and yet I have 17 people on the road with me, so it was financially very unrewarding, and you're in rough situation. You can't sleeping in buses, you can't even afford a hotel. And this is only a few years ago, and I'm pretty good on the road, and I did better than guys that were half my age, but still, at a certain point, and I think I'm kind of done with that way of doing it. COVID taught me a lot because I've done a lot of piano teaching my whole life, and I've had over 10,000 individual piano students. Never went into the school system. And I've been doing lessons for the last 3 years on Zoom, and people in Denmark and Israel and Australia. And it's maybe 80% as good as if I had them in the room. But I reach more people that way, and it's just like this, and I play, and they can see my hands and whatever.
Yeah, that's great. And that's probably a good link to what advice would you give, or do you give your students, Mike, on they're looking to make a career in music? What do you pass on to them, given what a new and challenging environment making a living in music is nowadays?
Probably don't count on making a living from the music, but do it if you love it, and see if you could have some rich parent support you or friend or inheritance. It's just, it's always been hard, and it's been a roller coaster. When I finished the first couple of years with Bowie, for the next 2 years I had no work, and people still thought I was with Bowie, and the phone never rang. And people would say, "Oh, I wish I knew. I would have had you in a band." It's that kind of a thing. My advice is, if you can't help it, because you love the music, just keep doing it and figure it out. One way or the other, figure it out. I mean, I did my share of $5 jazz gigs, and I even did gigs for $20, $30, 5, 10, 15 years ago, because I love playing, And so my advice is, if the passion is there, do not compromise, but you might have to be intelligent and figure out how you can monetize it, because it's almost impossible. with 60,000 tracks going up a day to Spotify. Go figure,
You mentioned you've got a worldwide cohort of students. I'm interested in what else you're currently working on now musically and what we might be able to expect from you, Mike, in the near future.
Thanks for asking that. I put together a movement of music. It's not known worldwide. It eventually will be accepted as a movement. And Bowie was the one who told me, make it a movement. Just don't be some freak that wrote this great music. And what this movement is called is now music, because I write the music in the moment, improvised classical music. And I've written thousands of pieces that way into the computer and all that kind of stuff. And then I have people copy it out using MIDI files and the MP3s and everything. And it's a new way of creating because they will sound like they're written. But I've been doing it for so many years that they're not. And I have written the normal way someone composes, but I'm not as good. I'm better at improvising. So even though it might not become a perfect piece, because it's improvised as opposed to sitting there, they have a life and a spirit about them. So I've been teaching that privately, and I've given some lectures at universities about it. And I wanted to teach it about 10 years ago at USC out here, and it's a great university. I went to the dean, and he loved what I did, but he was a moron because he said, he said, this is some of the best stuff I've ever heard. I said, okay, when do I start? And he said, we can't have you here because you're going to intimidate our teachers. I thought, that's a small-minded, stupid asshole, So anyway, it wasn't meant to be, and I'm one of those people that don't work too good in those political spaces of schools, and I want to just get to it with the student and help them, and there's so much other crap that goes on. A friend of mine who played with Miles Davis was teaching at a university out here, and he brought me in for 3 days to teach. He said to me that I got more done in the 3 days than he does in 6 months because they have them in paperwork. So I go around to different places. I've gone to Holland and different schools and give a little. My favorite thing is a little talk, questions and answers, and then to perform. I like that combination of teaching and playing.
Yeah, no, it's great. And there's a wonderful documentary I know you're aware of, Mike, that was released about 10 years ago on your career. And particularly, it was very much focused on your improvisational skills. So I love the fact that the now music movement is something. And people that maybe don't know Mike's work as well, or even, sadly, David Bowie's work that well, might be thinking that Mike's been a typical guy from Brooklyn and maybe embellishing some of the numbers. But I can tell you now, those thousands of songs Mike has written would absolutely be the case. And watching this documentary is very much worth it to see just how powerful an improviser Mike is and how well that flows in regards to composition. So, yeah, highly recommend it.
You mean that the documentary that's called Mike Garson and His 88 Friends?
Yes, that's the one, yeah.
Yeah, I've seen it on Amazon. It's pretty good. It doesn't capture all of me, but it certainly captures about 60%. And this crazy director, he used to make horror films in England,
really?
So he's out of his mind. But he captured me, and he followed me around for 7 years. He probably has 200 hours of crazy stuff, But it's a very nice documentary. It's not like the normal ones you see.
No,
it
is a bit unusual. And there's an interesting bit in the middle, Mike, where he has you sitting there looking grumpy and then show some x-rays of your hands, which are amazing. But this was 10 years ago, and like all of us, we all get deteriorations in our hands. How have you managed to do such amazing level playing still with the normal aging processes, let alone the workout you give your hands?
Well, my hands, if you look at them, they're more like someone 30 or 40. Because it's the only part of my body that's in perfect physical condition. And you're moving it all the time. And thank God I have no arthritis, and so I'm playing actually better than I've ever played in terms of depth, and I have all the speed I need and more. It's just that I don't use it all the time because I have a little more taste. When you're a kid, you just want to always be playing a lot of notes. I don't have a lot to say about that, as I feel fortunate that I could still play. I saw Horowitz play into his 80s in Rubinstein. I played a concert with Stanley Clarke at Carnegie Hall in 1979. Our opening act, the pianist was 100.
Wow.
Trying to remember his name, he had written a song called I'm Just Wild About Harry. Willie, I don't know if it was Willie the Lion Smith. I can't remember. The guy was 100. And I walked up to him in sound check. I said, I think I want to do that. You know what I mean? So as a pianist, conductors, pianists, orchestrators, they can work very well into the 80s and 90s. Elliott Carter, the classical composer, lived to 102 and was still composing symphonic stuff. A singer, it's very hard, you know. I mean, Tony Bennett did pretty good into his 90s, but Sinatra, when I saw him the last few years, he was losing it. I didn't even talk about the gigs that I turned out, which would have been Frank Sinatra and Sarah Vaughan and Buddy Rich.
Oh, you talk about them now, Mike, because Sinatra alone, that's a big turn down.
I just I wanted to go play fusion with Stanley Clarke, the bass player. And Buddy Rich was screaming at the band, so I thought if I want to be abused, I could go home, you know. So I left that gig in the middle. I never even got to the piano. I just walked out. And Sarah Vaughan, my friend, was her pianist and for 7 years, and he said, I'm ready to turn the job over to you. He said, but I'm going to tell you this. She ruined my life, and I'm never going to play again. So I'm going to only teach the rest of my life. So I wouldn't suggest you do the gig because she used to abuse me. So I didn't do that gig, you know. So and yet I took a David Bowie gig and didn't know who he was. So sometimes you do have to go by your intuition, you know.
That's a great point.
I'm just trying to imagine someone just turning down Buddy Rich and how he would react.
You know, the thing is, when I look back now, I would have loved to work with all three of those artists. It just, my trajectory and journey was with David Bowie in the rock world. It's the strangest thing because they all appreciate my avant-garde stuff, my classical stuff, and my jazz stuff, and my pop sensibilities more than the jazz and classical people do. Because I'm intimidating like that teacher does to some people who just are in one world. And I think it's great to just be only a classical pianist or only a classical composer, or only a jazz, but it's not who I am. I just hear whatever I hear, and it could go from a country lick to an atonal piece in 10 seconds. And that's just who I am. And some people despise that and some people love it.
And I feel like your career's worked out okay, Mike. So I don't think it hurts you turning down any of those.
I'm not complaining, but in some ways, I've told people this recently, in some ways, as Mike Garson, it feels like it's just beginning. Because Mike Garson served all these fantastic artists for virtually 60 years. And in a way now it's my turn. But I don't know what that really means. I'm very happy sitting here composing. You asked before, what is a typical day or what do I do? I'm working with my copyist, and he just sent me a PDF today of 1,100 pages of my music.
Wow.
And I'm still searching for more pieces. And there, I know I'm missing another 100 or 200. And then there's thousands of pieces on floppy disks when I used to work in those days with that sequencer, the old Yamaha QX3 and what have you. So, you know, and right now I'm at the piano and my computer screen is up, and anytime I'm inspired, I never shut off the system. I haven't shut off my digital piano. And I also have a disc clavier, which is a Yamaha modern player piano downstairs. It's a 9-foot concert grand, but it records MIDI data and it plays as a gorgeous piano. And it's connected to the studio upstairs here through Ethernet, so I could play here, let that one play that one, play here. And, you know, that's what my life is. And when I feel something, I sit down and compose. But what I've been doing lately is collating everything that I've done in the last 20, 30 years, because I've been disorganized, and now it's probably going to end up with 2,000 pages of music, and it's just a PDF, and then people could play them. It goes from Christmas music to jazz improvs to meditations to prayers to some very substantial, difficult classical pieces. And Bowie arrangements of tunes. I always like taking Space Oddity and, like etc. I could play for hours, but
Amazing.
time is it where you guys are? You must be in another zone.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Thank you for that. That was lovely. Thank you, Mike. You just then mentioned the disclavier and some of the digital pianos you use, and I know something our listeners and viewers will be fascinated to know is, over your career and also now, what have been some of the go-to keyboard rig setups that you've used? What are some of the better digital pianos you've used and that sort of thing?
It's funny because I am really known as a pianist, and that's people are just very happy that way. But I had my first Wurlitzer in 1959 when I was 14, and I kept it set up in my bathroom, so I never lost any time practicing. It was in my bathroom. And then I go into the living room for the big piano. Then I was in the Army band during Vietnam in the 60s, and I had the first Fender Rhodes. And then when I was touring with Bowie, even on pinups, I ran a piano through a Leslie speaker. But I also played the Hammond B3, that whole world with the Leslie in my early days. And then I had a mini Moog on stage with Bowie and clavinet. I had ARP ensembles. I've worked with synclaviers, Fairlights, a lot of Yamaha instruments, the old DX7s. Right behind me I have the Motif, which is just very quick for sounds. I have some Korg stuff. But most of my sounds now are in the computer, as you know. I heard somebody talking about that on one of your podcasts, and it's fast, but occasionally I will use some of the hardware. But people don't even know me as those things. But I've had a few people who said when I solo on synthesizer, they like it better than my piano playing. So it's really, people are happy with my Aladdin saying if I did nothing else, they'll still be my friend. But I can't not do a million other things because my mind is always working and I'm always in a creative mode because, like I said, it's the only thing that brings sanity to the world, especially since we're in such a divisive space these days. It's insane. It shouldn't be that way. One should be able to like vanilla ice cream, but not necessarily hate chocolate. They just like vanilla ice cream.
Yeah, that works on a whole bunch of levels, Mike. Couldn't agree more. And even just going back to you talking about your 1,100 songs and the amount of output and your improvisational abilities, I'm putting money on the fact that even when AI gets good, and it's a long way off getting good in music, I'd still pit you against AI to create good music for a long, long, long time to come.
Thank you. About 15 years ago, a friend of mine had created a program, and I had 2 disclaviers going. And this is like in the early 2000s, and I'd be playing one disclavier. The data was going into the computer, and the other piano was playing back things that it heard from me. And it was like, is the computer better than me? It was never actually better, but it fooled me a few times, But you can't replace the life force of the human, but use it, AI, as a tool.
That's
it's
right.
great. It's long as you don't blow the world up with it, you know.
That's right. And so, Mike, we ask every guest to tag a keyboard player, so someone that they would like to find out more about their career. And you've sort of mentioned it with Atticus Ross, but I thought I would ask it anyway. Is there someone you've always been fascinated about their career in music that you've not heard from before?
I'm pretty fortunate that I kind of know what's out there and who's out there. There's a lot of young talent that's just fantastic, and they're furthering the jazz, you know, furthering the classical. But no particular name comes to mind, you know. I just it's a love affair with music for me, and the piano happens to be my vehicle. Unlike a lot of musicians who play guitar and sing and what have you, it's my whole life has been dedicated to the piano, and it's still growing. When I was in my 20s, I really thought I knew about 80% of all music. And now in my later 70s, it feels like 3%. And it keeps shrinking because you realize, out of some form of humility, there's so much music out there that I didn't know, you know. So I'm basically like probably any musician you've had on your show or anywhere, any musician would say they're an eternal student if they're any decent at what they're doing. Any composer would tell you that, because we're always learning and studying.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely so true, that learning's a lifelong journey. No matter how much we know, there's always more. Now, another question we ask all our guests, Mike, is if you're trapped on that desert island, what are 5 albums you would not be able to live without?
So I heard you ask that. I think talking to Jeff Babko or somebody. And I started to think, do I know 5 albums that affected me that way? And I don't know, you know, it would be the Bowie album, Aladdin Sane, because it changed my whole life and formed my whole career. But Glenn Gould playing the Goldberg Variations by Bach, you know, listening to a Mozart Requiem, the Verdi Requiem, that's 4, and maybe Bill Evans at the Village Vanguard or something like that. You know?
Yeah, that's a great pick. That's a popular one too, Mike. The Village Vanguard album from Bill Evans is a popular pick, and rightly so.
You know, that's an old standard called My Romance.
Beautiful, absolutely.
I used to see Bill play it live. I walked up to him at the Vanguard and I said, "Can you give me a piano lesson?" He gave me a 6-hour free lesson.
Wow, it doesn't get much better than that.
No.
Mike, we're going to finish up, aside from any last thoughts from you, just with our quick fire 10 questions. So 10 questions that have sort of shorter and sharper answers, although we're open. We don't really care how long this goes, given that we're talking to you, Mike. So the first one is the first keyboard you ever owned.
It was a piano. It was called a Lester. Somebody else you interviewed had one also. They seemed to be a piano that was around in the 50s and 60s. It was a shitty spinet, but that's what I played on initially, before I worked my way up to a Steinway and what have you.
Cool. What's your most important pre-gig ritual?
My favorite thing is to have a piano backstage and warm up for 15 minutes or an hour, but not play music as much as just get my fingers ready. You know, anything to get the fingers going, you know. But if I improvise too much and make too much music, I've said it, then I go on stage, I have nothing to say, so I have to be careful. But doing that, and I don't like to eat anything with carbohydrates before I play, because then all the sugar goes to the stomach and your attention is in the wrong place. I can handle protein and a little bit of certainly water and things like that. It's important to stay hydrated, not get dehydrated, you know. So that's my thoughts there.
Great. Guitars, Mike, I don't know whether you've ever played one, but are they sexy or an abomination of an instrument?
I'm guilty, because I have one to my left, and I do pull it out every once in a while, and I usually amuse the bands I work with in a sound check. Very seldom I do it on stage, but I have pulled it out on stage once in a while. I once brought it to a Bowie rehearsal. He was hysterical laughing. He said, "Don't never use that."
All right, I'm really interested in the answer to this question. Have you ever used the transpose button on a keyboard?
Never. I can't. I go crazy.
Do you have perfect pitch as well, Mike?
Well, I had perfect pitch my whole life till a few years ago. I found out when you get older, you lose it. Same thing happened to Gary Burton. But all the years that I had it, I couldn't stand to hear something in a
that makes sense.
But I never used the transpose button. But they're useful for people who want to transpose.
A favourite gig you've ever done, Mike, if it's possible to pick out one?
Playing with Elvin Jones, his drum feel and his way of playing triplets and his spirit. I think I played with him, with Steve Grossman, who was a great tenor player who I also grew up with. That was very memorable. Playing with David Bowie, where we just did piano and voice at the Manhattan Center. I mentioned that we did My Death and Small Plot of Land, and playing with him at the Yahoo show where we did Wild as the Wind. It's innumerable, you know. I've done a lot of benefits, cancer benefits and things like that, where you change people's life. A friend of mine who's a famous producer died a few months ago, and I played at the ceremony at the chapel, and it was one of the best performances I ever did, because you have to have a meaning and purpose for why you're doing something. I always talk to other musicians about, we're professionals, so we'll always do the gig. But that just gets you on the field. The real artists find magic. And while we can't do it all the time, that's what we strive for. And anyone who you would talk to, and I'm sure you've talked to a lot, will tell you some version of that. And even David Bowie, we'd come off stage and he'd look at me and say, "Yeah, we phoned it in. We weren't there tonight." And then other nights he'll look at me and, you know, words are not necessary. It becomes ineffable at that moment.
Having toured all around the world, what's your favourite city you've ever played?
I love Dublin because they're always drunk there, and in Iceland too. I love Sedona in America because they have these beautiful red rocks in Arizona. I love playing in Israel. I played there many times. I played there with Bowie, and I played there solo and what have you. I played there with Chick Corea and Mike Brecker and Gary Burton. Where else? I guess my favorite places to play is downstairs in my living room with my 9-foot disc clavier open with high ceilings. And anytime I go out of the house, it never sounds as good.
Great answer.
So that's, if my wife would let me, I'd do all my concerts in the house, but she just doesn't want people coming in the house.
Fair enough.
But if it was up to me, well, I wouldn't leave. This piano here is called an Avant Grand, an N1. It's like a 3-foot baby grand digital where they insert a piano action into it. You know, one thing I didn't say, because you guys have dealt with so many studio musicians and great players in all your podcasts, Mick Ronson was standing with me on the first Bowie tour in front of Beverly Hills Hotel, and he said, "Mike, I'm warning you, don't become a full-time session player. They'll turn you into fucking white toast." He says, "Pick and choose the ones you want," which I have always done, "and you'll be fine." And I listened to that. The guy was only a month or two older than me, but it was wisdom. And while I'm a pretty good studio musician, I'm a little too stylistic and innovative for the average date. And, I was on a film date one day and there's 300 bars where you're not playing. I fell asleep. They didn't particularly admire that. So that, but I will show up for the occasional date. And if there's a meaning and purpose behind it, like I said, then the music will flow from me. If there's no real reason, I'd rather not do it. I'd rather be with my wife and my daughters. I have 7 grandkids. I'm a pretty lucky guy that way. So I have a very well-rounded life, and the fact that I never used any drugs is probably one of the reasons I'm here telling these stories, because most of my friends are dead, and many of them for reasons connected with drugs. I had one bass player friend shot himself in the head. Another bass player friend was sniffing coke, and he said to his girlfriend, he said, "I think I crossed the line," and a minute later he was dead. Stuff like that. I mean, cannot people predict consequences? Is that what the problem is here? But in any case, my dad was a liquor salesman. He introduced me to jazz, but never drank. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's amazing. And Mike, what's the best thing about playing live? Again, probably hard to quantify, but what is the best thing?
That interaction, and I have a piece called Interaction also. It's the interaction with the band, or if I'm playing solo, the band and the audience, or me and the audience. It's very funny when I look at the world situation now, the thing that people crave for, and they'll pay $3,500 for 2 tickets to see Adele, Guilty, or Taylor Swift in that world, or whatever it is, U2, there's something about live music that will change a person if the band is sincere and on, and the people there are connected to them. So it's an interaction. I see music as a form of communication, and as long as you feel connected with somebody, magic will happen. You have to still do your homework and rehearse and all the normal things, but when you hit that stage, there's got to be a connection. If I'm playing solo piano, it has to be direct to the audience. If I'm playing with a band, it's through the band and to the audience. So, it's my favorite thing to do. There was a period of 10 years where my favorite thing was composing, but I've composed so much that now I'm able to play a little more and more like organize my legacy rather than to have to be writing. I would write every day as a discipline from the early 90s to the 2005 or 6, where I would get up 7 in the morning and I would be in the studio from 7 a.m. till 3 in the morning. And I maybe would write 6 or 8 classical pieces in one day. The improvisational ones, that's why I could write so much. If I was composing this way, it would take me 200 years if I had to do it with pen and paper,
So with that all said, what's the worst thing about playing live?
I get still to this day a little nervous, stage fright, and hands get cold and sweaty, and fear that you're not going to deliver, the fear that the sound system will be off. That's a musician's biggest nightmare, not balanced sound, the piano being out of tune. These kind of things drive me crazy. But once I pass through that and embrace the audience, see, my concept is if you're at the piano here and the audience is here, it's not the solution. The idea is to embrace the audience. You put them in your space. So now you're one, and then creating from that space.
Oh, excellent.
I think the great artists do that subconsciously.
Exactly. Yeah. One thing, Mike, you'd like to see invented that'd make your life as a keyboard player easier?
Well, in the 70s, I envisioned a MIDI piano and being able to collect that data and have it replay and everything. So I got my wish, and then I had this clavier. I got the wish when it got refined. I'm good, I'm continually refining my studio, but I got my wish early on. I saw it in my head. And I had the first MIDI grand piano. They only made 150. Billy Joel had one, Elton John had one, I had one, a few other people, Chick Corea had one. But there were so many buttons on the fall board, and the classical guys didn't know what to do with it. The jazz guys didn't care. And the rock guys were too stupid to figure out how to do it. So I was going around the country demonstrating and playing it, and I had 8 modules of DX7s at the time connected to them, and all of a sudden I'm playing straight piano and I kicking these things for like 100 piano dealers, and they hear all these strings and they didn't know what was going on. So I do love that world of technology, but I really have everything I need. The soft synths are just so good now that it's scary. And I don't know when I'm listening to what anymore. They're so refined, and that's great for when I'm writing classical stuff that needs symphonic elements. But I used to program crazy drum beats and do electronic stuff. And I'd walk around with the guitar playing all the synths in my studio. And
what is your favorite non-musical activity, hobby, way to spend your time?
I love studying areas that have to deal with spirituality. So I just like reading things in that area. I studied a lot of things in my life. I studied a book called A Course in Miracles years ago. There was a great guy, psychiatrist, and then became like a very advanced, enlightened teacher named Dr. David R. Hawkins. He's written a book called Power versus Force. I like his material. But the biggest truth is my hobby is my profession. So I'll just be playing for no reason. I've talked to a lot of musicians who say they need to know they have a gig to get to work. And I understand that, but I'll play if there's no work. Nothing on the horizon, and I'll just sit and practice. The way I got my first record deal was just practicing 8 hours a day for a year. It almost emanates the vibe, and then the record company calls. It's a little oversimplification, but the music attracts more music.
And that's the reason why, Mike, the era of Mike Garson is only just beginning. We can't thank you enough for the last 2 hours of walking us through just a small part of your amazing career. But I think you've been an ornament. You mentioned about whipped cream for David Bowie. I think you've been more an ornament to music more generally, and can't thank you enough for taking the time.
Well, I have one thing I want to do now with you
please.
guys. I'm going to have you give me 4 notes, and I'm going to write a piece. But we have to agree on the 4 notes. So what's the first note?
I'm going to say B flat.
Second note?
I'll go B then.
Third note?
Let's go F sharp.
And I will finish with D.
That's pretty cool.
bravo, thank you. You've quite possibly made our decade, I think it's safe to say.
That was incredible. Thank you so much for doing that for us, Mike.
But you could see what I said. I like my words to connect with my actions. So, a lot of people could talk about improv. Bad improv, I much rather hear Mozart, but if you could improvise at a level that's as high as you could possibly do, like Chick Corea or Brad Maldo or Herbie Hancock or Keith Jarrett, and I'm bringing in classical elements when I do. And this one I had a mixture of some avant-garde, some classical, and some straight-ahead jazz. There's nothing better because I was creating in the moment to this audience, which is the three of us, you see? So it would have been different if it was a different set of people because my fingers are affected by who's in the space because I'm not playing written music. I was on a gig once and I thought I was on a jazz gig and I couldn't get my fingers going. So on the break, on the halfway point, I said to the promoter, I apologize, I should give you a refund. I can't play. I said, I'm trying to play these jazz solos and they sound terrible. It sounds like new age piano playing. He said, yeah, this is a new age audience. Did you remember you did a new age album for us? And I had forgotten. And that's who was coming to see me. I didn't know. So, and then I was playing with Freddie Hubbard in LA and was on a whole jazz audience, and some of my playing was the best I ever played. And then I gave a class in North Texas to 280 piano players about 30 years ago, and it was some of the best improv I did because there was a reason to play for these people, because I only, with students or other musicians, my job is not data. My job is to inspire. And if I don't do that, I don't sleep well. So I have to keep my game high to be able to do it. And I didn't know if this 4-note thing was going to happen today, because if I didn't feel it, we would have ended a few minutes ago. But I thought, well, I've talked about this now music. I've improvised my whole life. Let me do it. And sometimes they're not too good. But this was a very good one.
And I can say honestly, Mike, that if you were seeking to inspire you and it helps you sleep, you should sleep like a log tonight because you've definitely inspired. So I can't thank you enough. And therein lies the end of what I believe was an amazing interview. And I don't mean that because we're amazing, Paul, but because Mike is an amazing guest.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, we're very lucky with the guests we have on, but Mike was incredible. And look, we just ask a simple question and our guests give us beautiful answers. So what a treat that was, David.
And for the whole audience to get even one of Mike's amazing improvisations live doesn't get a lot better than that.
No, that was like our own little mini Aladdin Sane, just for us listeners and viewers of the Keyboard Chronicles podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. So no, real privilege, Mike. Can't thank you enough for your time. I know you'll probably listen or watch to this. And to Mike's huge credit, Mike actually listens to the show and has listened to a few episodes, and it's an absolute honour to have players like Mike actually taking the time. So yeah, can't thank you enough, Mike. So we'll be back again in a fortnight or so. Again, a huge shout out to our supporters, midnightmastering.com. Great mixing and mastering on a really good budget. Really appreciate Mike and the team's support there. Tammy at Tammy's Musical Stew. Tammy, as always, couldn't do it without you. Radio Grande YouTube channel, do check it out. Some great funky music on there. TheMusicPlayer.com forums, our home for more than 20 years and hopefully for a long, long time to come. And Brother Paul Brown from the Waterboys, the inimitable. I think I've used that term for you before, Paul, but no, if ever the word inimitable applies to a musician, it's Brother Paul. So thank you, Brother Paul, for your support. So you can always keep in touch with us via the usual means. We are on Facebook under the Keyboard Chronicles. We're on Instagram as the Keyboard Chronicles. We're on TikTok as the Keyboard Chronicles. We're on Twitter as the Keyboard CHR1. And good old-fashioned email is editor@keyboardchronicles.com. Paul, we have for Joe Muscara's sake, the one listener that always sticks right through to the end, we have some pretty amazing guests coming up over the coming weeks. I did a live stream yesterday where I sort of unveiled these anyway. But for those wondering what's coming next, we have a range. I think we're doing 5 or 6 shows recordings, Paul, in the next 3 weeks, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to being so busy with the podcast, and I have to say, David, it's very, very humbling how many amazing keyboard players want to talk to us. It's I still pinch myself every day, and we're going to be busy. We're going to have so many great interviews lined up for all of you wonderful listeners and viewers. And thank you, David, as always. Like, this is what everyone doesn't know, right? If we look at the distribution of work that goes into this podcast, as I'm looking at the screen, David's on that side, so I'd say 90% of it's there and 10% of it's on me. And if I've got my fingers backwards, then 90% of it's over there. But I have to say, this is my little tribute to David Holloway. The amount of work he's put into just getting these guests lined up, dealing with busy schedules and all the rest of it, and just so we can all enjoy spending time with these people and learning from them. So thank you, mate. That's my tribute to you.
Thank you. No, that's hugely appreciated, but you are underestimating in the algorithm of work the 80% sex appeal that you bring to the show. So you can't underestimate that. But no, thanks, mate. I appreciate that. So we'll be back in a couple of weeks. Again, thank you all for listening out there. We do appreciate it, and we'll see you soon.